it's preferable to live in a world where people are limited by their imagination than by their skills. Meaning like the people that will thrive in this new era are not the people with the skills. It's the people with the imagination, right? It's the people that the imagination and the courage.
Hey everyone, welcome back to MindHack. I'm your host, Cody McLean, and today's episode is going to be about AI and productivity. It's been driving everybody crazy lately, and it's created this endless pursuit to be more productive, to move faster, to do more, and maybe that's also what's making us miserable. Today, I have Sari Azout with us today. Sari is the founder of Sublime, and honestly, she's a pretty refreshing voice in this whole tech space. While everyone is obsessing about how AI can make us more productive, Sari is out here asking, what if we have this backwards? What if AI and this idea of productivity is actually slowing us down and preventing us from doing our best work? I found her through her essay, The End of Productivity, and it hit me because it really challenges the belief that AI goes hand in hand with meaning and productivity. And perhaps it's not all about success and efficiency. Her company Sublime is building something entirely different. It's a creative tool that's more about meaningful engagement rather than just checking boxes off a to-do list. And with all the craze lately about how DeepMind or DeepSeek has really been changing the game, I want to dig in about how is AI and productivity, is that something that goes hand in hand? Is that something that we can work with to expand our productivity? Sari, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. How does AI fit in with deep work or productivity, or can it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always said like technology is never good or bad. It just is. And it can be put to work in so many ways. So you can use AI to be infinitely more productive. You can use AI to be infinitely more creative. It really, I think, depends on the set of values that you're building with, right? What do you mostly care about, right? If you're building a product that, allows people to churn out thousands of half-baked, like boilerplate SEO, perfect, ready content marketing things to, drive traffic to your site, AI can help you do that perfect. If you're trying to write the perfect essay, there's AI that can help you be infinitely more creative and explore variations and edit that to perfection. And so I think AI is an incredibly, incredibly powerful tool. And I think right now, as a species, I think that technology advances far faster than our capacity to internalize and understand the implications or really understand what we want out of them. And for me, one of my worries is that we basically spent like years and decades since the Industrial Revolution really behaving like robots. And so we kind of talk about how AI is becoming more human, but I think we rarely talk about how humans became so robotic, in so many ways. I think kind of like go to a 9-to-5 job and do all of these things that can be replaced. It's really calling into question, what is our unique kind of role in the world? And so for me, what I'm excited about is the possibility for AI to help us create the things that only we can create, be infinitely more creative. And that actually has nothing to do with speed, right? It's not about pressing a button and automating 100 SEO articles. It's about intentionality. So I think in my life, the way that AI is showing up is there's a million things that I want to automate. But what are the things that I don't want to automate? I think human beings will always want to create for the sake of creation. It doesn't matter that AI can write a children's book faster than I can. I still have a point of view and, the little kind of quirks and the tone and like that manifestation, it matters. And so I'm just much more interested in AI to help you make something wonderful than AI to help you make something fast.
I've been really head deep in AI development, and I find it interesting. I'll be in like a Discord because we have Bolt, we have Replit, and we have like Cursor, various AI development tools that will automatically code for you. And we've been showing that, studies have come out and showing that AI has increased like the productivity of developers by like 130% of like junior or mid-tier developers. And now it seems like if it's taking over our work, does that deprive us of the meaning of the satisfaction of having done it ourselves? And I'll be in a Discord and I'll be talking about how to overcome some issue with it, and then somebody will just pop in and be like, "Wow, this is so amazing! Like, I can't believe it can do all these things." And simultaneously, I'm like, "Well, just wait," because they're also going to see how it's not really able to produce the kind of work that they wanted to produce. But I want to go back on that point of how does it perhaps deprive us of the meaning of the satisfaction? If you're able to write a blog post and then just have AI do everything for you, does that make us less motivated to continue writing?
I think that in some ways, I think we have it backwards in the sense that the place where I fully embrace AI is that I think we basically have lived in a world thus far where you have to develop all of these skills in order to be creative. And now it's like, no, you can just be creative. Like, you don't need all of these skills. And I actually think that's incredible and takes us closer to our meaning. If I have an idea for a game that I want to develop and I don't have the coding skills, now more and more, I'll be able to manifest that creative vision without having the coding skills. So I actually think that AI will take us closer because it's going to basically reduce that gap between imagination and reality. Whatever you can imagine, you can make true. Now, I do think a lot of these kind of like fortune cookie Twitter people saying like, all engineering jobs will disappear within 3 years. Like, I think they're completely overblown. As somebody who's like basically spends 12 hours a day in front of a computer building software, there's just so much for humans to do. And I think that, the layer at which humans will add value will change. And I think for the better. But I also think that so much of the value in building things comes down to craft and taste and interface details. And, if you prompt Claude or ChatGPT or DeepSeek or whatever, it can suggest hundreds of ways of doing something, but it's not going to suggest your way of doing something. And so I really think that in a world where AI is making so many things a commodity, what's not a commodity is like human attention. Why will people care about your thing? Why will people be bothered to read something that you couldn't write yourself or that you didn't care about yourself? And so, I don't know, I just think that there's just going to be a lot more noise. And consequently, the stories, the motivation, like we're not just building Sublime because there's this kind of mercenary belief that we need a knowledge management tool or because we ran a search and realized, that people would pay for this. There's just like deep rooted philosophical reasons for building this thing. And I think people care about that. We crave kind of connection and understanding and stories. And it's about taking people on a journey. So yeah, I think all of these things really comes down to what are truly the things that will matter in a world where a lot of the technical and hard skills will become more commoditized.
Well, actually, I want to go back and look at, so Mark Andreessen had this Twitter post where he said in the past, creativity was really the root of a lot of success. And then it became execution and with having to do all this work yourself. And now we're kind of back to creativity in the sense that you can have AI do the work for you. But as you said, you can ask AI for something and you can get like 100 different types of responses. And a lot of it right now, it comes back on how well did you engineer that prompt? And if you want to build a good app, it's how well did you build the schema and the database and the instructions prior to just putting it in a box and telling it to build. I guess that's a defining feature between where we are right now is that it's still on the human to create a really good prompt and utilize AI as a tool to help them accomplish what they want to do. I wonder how long, though, it's going to be until we have maybe general AI or just that it improves, say, at the end of this year, where it will have a better understanding about the objective that you're trying to achieve. And then especially with DeepSeek that came out, they spent maybe $6 million and they're able to come up with a model that is consistently proving to be better than all of the other closed source models out there. And it shows you, it's really fascinating if you haven't used it. If you click on the Deep Think and it tells you its thinking process. And I'm sure O1, from ChatGPT has that as well, but it's just fascinating to see the development of AI. So right now it's a tool, that is only useful to the person who's good enough to use it properly. But I wonder how long it's going to take to transition where it understands the objective in a very well understood way.
I could not agree more with what Mark Andreessen said, that we're going back to creativity. I also would agree that AI is probably more creative than 99% of humans. So I'm not going to sit here and say, creativity is completely in the domain of humans and AI cannot be creative. That said, I think creativity is about so much more than outcome. Creativity is about, the story. Why should I trust? If there's two people that prompted an AI, but one of them has a much more powerful story around why they created that than the other, that really truly matters. And then the other piece about it is I think that AI is very good at providing huge number of ideas, but it's really about how you choose the final idea and how you execute on refining it, right? So I was like prompting Claude the past couple of weeks to help with some like growth and creative campaign ideas. Most of what it recommended was just like off brand and not aligned and not really culturally relevant. When it did suggest something really good, there, depending on how you prompt it, there's infinite kind of word choices and feelings. And I just think that the power of brand and craft and aesthetics and, in a world like, I even think that like basically with AI and people being able to create like UGC with avatars, that you probably should go back to direct mail as a form of market. Really comes down to what is AI making abundant? And as a result of that, what is becoming scarce? And so we are thinking like, even just from a growth perspective with Sublime, like we are like shipping people physical artifacts. We created a zine. Like there's just, content is becoming so commoditized that you have to do things that are different. And I think that humans will never stop chasing novelty, right? And so 6 months ago, a lot of the A stuff was novel. Now it's not. People are going to get bored of it. So it's really about that chasing that frontier of like making people feel something. And that's always going to require somebody that is really in tune with culture and can earn trust at the end of the day, which is not something that AI can do for you.
This great newsletter called Morning Brew, and they have like the Sunday edition that's more of like a deep dive into something. And I remember that this edition where the editor was saying that he had some really viral content pieces, but he spent hours in a library reviewing old newspaper clippings and articles because those were not readily available in AI or Google. And so he seemed to argue that in order to be different, you have to be willing to do things that other people are not doing, which most people are just typing in something on Google or ChatGPT now and getting this response. And that's going to be no different than really anybody else's content. And that's what's making this harder and harder to be able to compete.
So you're getting at the heart of why I think that Sublime is so necessary. The way I describe it is really, we need the competitive advantage will be source grounded AI. So it's not enough to just prompt the generic internet. You have to curate a corpus of content that is unique, that pulls from, a diverse set of sources, because at the end of the day, like what data you're using dictates the outcome. And that layer, the curation layer is critical. And we think that's so much of the work that we're doing on Sublime is enabling that curation. You curate and save anything from anywhere. You create these collections of content and then you can use that content, feed it into the AI, but that curation is grounded in the sources that you love and trust. And so, I think ultimately I embrace AI fully because I think it's preferable to live in a world where people are limited by their imagination than by their skills. Meaning like the people that will thrive in this new era are not the people with the skills. It's the people with the imagination, right? It's the people that the imagination and the courage, right? Because if you can do anything, like, sure, you can do anything, but will you, So I think these themes that you're touching on are spot on. And I think curation will always, always, always matter.
So you've mentioned Sublime a few times. And so Sublime, as I understand it, it's a PKM or personal knowledge management tool. It's similar to apps like, say, Notion or Evernote, or even Roam or Obsidian on the more obscure sides of it. And then there's also Readwise. So I've looked at Sublime, and my brain immediately went to, oh, this is kind of like Readwise, because Readwise started out just, they sending out a like a daily, like, here are your 10 highlights from books that you've read, because it'll sync Kindle notes. And then they went into the Readwise Reader, which allows you to go and add articles online to the Readwise thing. It was kind of similar to Get Pocket, which is kind of like the first tool in that space that allowed you to like clip articles to read later. Can you describe like what is your USP, your unique selling point, and how does it differentiate?
Yeah, totally. So you're right. So Sublime is in the domain of personal knowledge management. We are purpose built to essentially curate a library of all the interesting things you come across. So whether it's images, screenshots, links, articles, videos, podcasts, highlights, we bring all of that in one place. We integrate with Readwise, so Readwise can complement Sublime. And really, the differentiation between Sublime and other tools really comes down to three things. One is we looked at all the tools in the space, and as creatives ourselves, everyone in the team is a creative in some way, either Substack writer or a creative technologist. None of the tools spoke to us. We felt there was a huge and steep learning curve. So if the analogy that a user came up with the other day is most PKM tools look like an airplane cockpit. Sublime feels like a yoga studio. So the first kind of vector of differentiation is simplicity. The second one is it's not about just collecting ideas. It's about connecting them. So if you think about, you see a quote somewhere on the internet that you want to save, you can dump it in your Obsidian or your Apple Note or your Notion, and that's it. That's kind of the extent of its world. On Sublime, everything you add unlocks a gateway of related ideas and insights from both your library and other people's libraries. This is what people love about it. So essentially, you are combining the utility of a single player knowledge management tool where you're saving all the interesting things you come across, but along with the serendipity of a multiplayer experience. So imagine if you're a writer and you are interested in writing about the future of productivity with AI. You can start to dump kind of thoughts into Notion, but if you do the same thing on Sublime, you'll be fed just like all of these delightful, curated thoughts and ideas from other people's libraries. And because we sync with Kindle highlights and things like that, you're just going to find these non-obvious gems that you would never find in the kind of SEO optimized internet. So all that to say that the thing people love about it the most is that it is multiplayer. There's other people. And so you can put in a thought or idea and discover many more. And for our customers who, for the most part, are either intellectually curious people or people who are producing kind of intellectual or creative output consistently, Sublime is just this inspiration engine. And yeah, some people say that they tried to use kind of ChatGPT in the past to do what Sublime does, but they couldn't get it to provide the kinds of like culturally relevant, high quality recommendations. And so we basically have a body of like millions and millions of curated, ideas, links, thoughts, images, screenshots, and so you can kind of get inspiration on demand for any project that you're working on as you build your own knowledge management tool. So I always say that Sublime has two sides. The practical side, which is everyone spends a lot of time consuming information, but they forget a lot because our memories are leaky and limited. And Sublime exists so that you can build kind of repository of all those things you come across, search them intelligently. We use all sorts of like AI things to help you make that process easier. But then there's the philosophical side of Sublime, right? So there's the practical and the philosophical. And the philosophical really is we see ourselves as not just creating knowledge management software, but really inverting the internet's kind of consumption model. Because if you think about the web today, you essentially open Twitter and see a feed of all sorts of unrelated ideas designed to distract you, right? So it's the, tweet about like Donald Trump, the other thing about somebody's cat dying, the other tweet about the fires. And like our brains are just not designed to cope with, just this context shifting. And so with Sublime, it's really about shifting from hijacking your attention, which is what social media does, to deepening your intention, right? You put in a thought or idea because you're going to maybe, your next podcast guest, you're going to talk about, user interfaces in an AI world or whatever. So you can create a collection about that theme on Sublime. And it's going to pull you down a rabbit hole of related ideas. And at the end of that session, you're going to feel like, wow, you're closer to creating than you are to having lost 5 hours passively consuming the web, feeling like shit about yourself.
Do you also generate like a knowledge tree based on the content, like Obsidian?
Not exactly like Obsidian, I would say. I don't know exactly what you mean by knowledge tree, but basically the information architecture of Sublime is we have cards and collections. Anything you add to Sublime is a card. We do all sorts of things behind the scenes to appropriately kind of create the right metadata so you can retrieve it. So the way that we think about organization is you now have semantic search. So basically, like you could write like you think or the way you would ask a friend, and you should be able to retrieve most things you're looking for. So I think in some respects, kind of traditional tagging, knowledge tree organization, we think is obsolete. But we do have collections. And if you look at the way people use collections on Sublime, very different from tagging, right? Collections are more personal contexts that are more actionable, right? So you mentioned that every piece that I wrote, when I first was commissioned to write this piece, I created a collection on Sublime to dump inspiration. And that is something uniquely human because it is all of these ideas and how I am like uniquely thinking about those ideas. But it's not, here's a thought, let me tag it, creativity or productivity. You know, we just feel like tagging is unnecessary with semantic search.
I do love that. It reminds me of like a commonplace book. I know that's been popular throughout history, like Thomas Edison. A lot of famous writers in history would have a book that they had with them their entire lives. And then they would put highlights and thoughts into this one book. And so a lot of their writing will refer back to this commonplace book. And I know that we have Notion and Evernote. And I think a lot of the problem with some of these existing is that you end up spending more time trying to understand like the architecture and how to organize it than you do actually like spend like actually looking at the notes. And I built up like this impressive like Evernote collection of all these things. And I still find that when I'm interested or I'm trying to research something, I would just default to Google. And now it'll be like ChatGPT. And in some ways, it doesn't make you want to like instantly search for your existing knowledge base. So I like how you kind of combine not only knowledge that you find and collect, and it combines other people's knowledge. So it's not just stuff that you have. And then probably in a way that is not something where you have to figure out, okay, how am I going to structure this so that I can find the relevant information. So I do love that. And I think that's definitely the right approach and how we're evolving. Because if somebody goes and asks ChatGPT to write an article or something, it's going to use generalized knowledge, and that's not going to differentiate you from anybody else. But if you use a tool like Sublime, then all of a sudden you're being able to see the correlations, maybe stories, quotes, ideas, philosophies, that is not just in the confines of this narrow structure of information that any kind of LLM is going to pull from.
I mean, yeah, so many things you said there that are spot on. I think first, the reference to commonplace books is an incredible one. We get this all the time. Some of our users have said that Sublime is a digital collaborative commonplace book, and that, you know, it was just like the dream of all of these kind of historical figures that, as you said, relied on commonplace books for their writing. And so that's an incredible analogy, especially because I always say that if you think about knowledge management tools, you have Apple, like you have the kind of like jack of all trades note-taking tools, whether it's Apple Notes, Obsidian, Rome, they're designed for everything. It's like your to-do list and your task manager and your kind of meeting notes and your CRM. And then you have kind of Sublime, which is really purpose-built to be the home for all the interesting things you come across. And I always say, I don't want my kids' like health insurance information alongside the kind of ideas that resonate with me. Those two things kind of deserve to be in different places. And so Sublime is not the analogy with like a tool like Notion, et cetera. It's, you know, it's an imperfect analogy because the reality is that we are not a to-do list. We are not a CRM tool. We are not a project management tool. Sublime is purpose-built to be a library of all the interesting things you come across. And that, I think, allows us to go really deep into that use case. Because if you think about the architecture of a tool like Evernote or Notion, like you can figure out how to kind of patch it up to become that. But it's designed to be a Swiss Army knife that does a million other things. And consequently, there's just a high learning curve to retrofitting it for this use case. Whereas on Sublime, the moment you come in, you just add cards to your library. It's the atomic unit is kind of the card in the inside, and with our browser extension, it's just so easy to, in our iOS app to just like save anything interesting you come across as you go and just build this library of ideas that on Notion, you'd have to be like, oh, but where do I place this? What page does this belong in? And it's just like, it's this like daunting question of how do I organize this? That I think we completely like get rid of. The other thing that you mentioned around, having this kind of Evernote repository, but then defaulting to Google search. And I think that is why it's such an interesting time to be building knowledge management tools, because in the past, the ROI of using these tools was really bad. You would essentially spend all this time collecting things, but when it came time to search and retrieval, you couldn't find it. It was just very hard to find. And now with AI, the search capabilities are becoming insanely good. And so it's no longer wasted time to spend your time kind of curating these resources. And then in addition to that, what you said of, you can prompt ChatGPT and do what everyone else is doing, or you can curate a set of resources that is uniquely your own, that is a result of kind of painstaking effort and an awareness of your domain and a degree of taste and an understanding that is just uniquely your own. And I think that's a competitive advantage. So I truly, truly believe that a curated personal knowledge base has never mattered more.
But at the same time, so if we're combining all of this information, even if it's information that we've discovered on our own, or we've learned, or we've clipped and highlighted from books that we've read, I wonder though if we're outsourcing, we're delegating this, all of the like the ideation and the connection of ideas to an AI, and we're asking it to do all of this hard work. And so is that going to impact our ability to think critically? I think that was like a huge criticism of AI, is if we have a tool that we can literally outsource our thinking to, is that going to make us unable to think, like Dumb and Dumber? Like we're just not going to be able to have that level of thinking. What's your take on that?
I think that the world is just going to be a little bifurcated, right? Some people will use AI to outsource their thinking, and in the same way that they don't cook anymore because they order a burrito on their phone, and they don't kind of compute anymore because they use a calculator, and you can then never have to write an email again because you'll just prompt AI. And I think that there's the history of kind of humanity and our progress as a species has been like just more and more convenience. And so I think there's going to be a large swath of the population that's going to just go down this path of convenience and kind of lowest common denominator. And that certainly is going to happen and is already happening. I think that you could also use AI to think deeper. Every single thing that I've written over the last couple months, I would say the bar has been higher because I now have a thinking companion available 24/7 that can help me see connections I hadn't seen before, that can help me figure out the right questions. It can, one thing is like artificial intelligence, have the AI do the work. But what about artificial inquisitiveness? What if you prompt the AI to ask you questions and help you go deeper? And so I just don't think that AI has a mandate or is prescriptive in any way. You can kind of use it in any way you want. And I think that is kind of the concern I was getting to, is that we're not having enough time to adapt to this technology in the ways that are conducive to our overall health as a species. And the same thing happened with social media. I think we kind of created these networks and platforms, never really kind of understanding how they would play out. And I don't think Steve Jobs ever imagined how addictive these devices would be, that we would spend, 6 hours a day scrolling, that, they would completely hijack our ability to concentrate and focus and deepen our intention and spend time with loved ones. And so I think that is like the risk of AI, that, that these things just become hyper addictive, hyper available, and that we don't have time to kind of adapt and educate ourselves to use them in ways that actually further our intentions. So that's a real question, and one that I think we should all be grappling.
Simultaneously, Steve Jobs didn't allow his children to have iPads. So I think he had some perception of how technology might impact us to one degree or another. I guess if I were to look at like samurai sword makers in Japan. That's probably something that takes decades of mastery to learn. I mean, what kind of world are we going to be in which nobody has to have expertise on something? And I also realize this doesn't have to be a debate if we agree on certain perspectives, not trying to push you into a corner. Simultaneously, I'm somebody who uses ChatGPT for a lot of things. I mean, my new motto is, what would ChatGPT do? And anytime I come up a problem, I find myself I have the action button on the iPhone. So I find I have that hook to just open up ChatGPT. And anytime I come across a problem or an issue, I'm defaulting to just using that now. Where say in the past, maybe it would have been Google, or maybe I would have called a friend and I would have, asked them this question, but simultaneously it would have been like a method of connecting with them. And so I think there's still like a lot of fears. I think we all see the potential of AI, but there's also like the unknowns. And I think that's also kind of scary to look at if we're delegating our thinking to it, but it's allowing us to have more creative work. Is that creativity? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're getting at something that I deeply agree with, which is that in a world where so many things can be summoned by pressing a button, we are just becoming incapable of being patient people that invest in things that take a very long time to come to fruition. And I think that there are things in life that you want to compress and make more efficient. And, maybe like sending out, responding to the 3 mails in my inbox this morning is something that, I'm perfectly fine doing more efficiently. But there are things where the value and the meaning are precisely in the kind of effort you have to invest. I keep coming back to, for example, like Jiro Dreams of Sushi, the movie of this Japanese chef, and just like how he devoted life to perfecting this nigiri. And I just think that's incredible. And I also think that that the generations that we're raising are kind of like more and more incapable of that kind of like sustained attention into like the mundane. But I also think, back to the question of what will become scarce, is that being able to create like a brick and mortar experience or a coffee shop or an artisanal something, a lot of these things will become extremely valuable because it's a sign of like artisanship in ways that a lot of the kind of things that happen digitally are not. So I think a lot of the signaling is going to shift away from digital towards things that demonstrate more kind of effort and pain involved. So yeah, so I do think it is a problem that for the most part, the values in which we've built technology is all about making work easier, making things faster, as opposed to like, I genuinely think that so many people are just like feel anxious because the pace at which technology is advancing and all of these tools available to us kind of like encouraging us to live a faster life. Even if you think about like the taglines of a lot of these tools, like from thought to action, faster than humanly possible, or, create all the content you need and like, we'll post it for you. And it's like, that's not our natural rhythm as humans. We are slow thinkers, but we are deep in terms of empathy. And so, yeah, again, I really think that it's very easy to lose the plot in terms of building more and more technology and losing sight of what are the actual human values we're trying to optimize for. And I do think at some point, like there is an inconvenience to convenience. And we're to some extent seeing it now. We built like an ability to connect with anyone in the world. And yet loneliness is, the highest it's ever been. So how do you square those things?
I would actually challenge you. I came across an article recently that was a study. I don't know if it was a meta study, but it seemed to indicate that a lot of the research that indicated that we're lonely is not necessarily true, that it may be an inaccurate representation. I don't have like a lot of more information. I'm going to actually say that I'll put a link to that article in the show notes, and then maybe you can research it afterwards. You mentioned like the idea of deep work. And I know Cal Newport is the most tangible figure on this idea of deep work. I know he said the ability to perform deep work is becoming increasingly rare at exactly the same time it is becoming increasingly valuable in our economy. And yeah, you're right, is that we have all of these tools, there was some kind of funny acronym that it was trying to show the how AI, like everything is AI. You could actually buy a vacuum cleaner that has AI in it, like the Samsung vacuum. It's just ridiculous how every company is really jumping on this AI, and they're touting it as something that's going to make you more productive. They're going to, you insert some text, generates an automatic slide presentation for you, and it removes a lot of the execution behind it. Simultaneously, people are using it not only for execution, but also creativity. And right now, we're still early in this era. So the people who use AI tools are going to have a heads up over the people who don't. But then I wonder, what is our world going to look like when everybody's using AI tools for execution and creativity? It reminds me of like the dead internet theory, which is this idea that maybe 80% of everything you see on the internet is bots interacting with bots. Like, is that going to be our future?
It's a huge question. I think we're already seeing that. Misinformation and, the social fabric of our kind of generations past was really based on this kind of shared reality. And I think that AI just completely ruptures that, right? Because everyone's in their own bubble, and like the pace of content being generated by AI and by bots, and, I think that that's going to be a huge issue. I think it's going to ironically make a lot of people go offline, just like offline will be the new luxury and the new kind of frontier of trust. Back to the question of deep work, I find it shocking that we've essentially delegated our attention to the world's largest advertising companies, because that's what we've done. If you think about the 6+ hours a day most people spend scrolling, they are just giving 6 hours of their precious life away daily to advertising companies that don't have their best interest at heart. And I completely agree with Cal Newport that the destruction of our attention, it just compromises our ability to make progress on anything worthwhile in our lives. And so what I always say and have advocated for is, you don't need to go live in a cabin or swear off Netflix, but you do have to live more deliberately, right? It's like we are living in what I call the post-information age, where the barrier is no longer information. The barrier is intention. It's self-regulation. It's courage, right? It's like saying, I want to spend, the next 3 months, heck, whatever, like creating a recipe book to conserve my grandmother's recipe. I have that intention. Let me have that courage. Let me regulate myself. Let me get that done, because there's so many distractions. And so I think so much of the problem today is that we are exposed to so many of the world's problems, and no one benefits from just scrolling and feeling sad. If you're just going to scroll and like read about the LA fires and feel really sad about it, but not do anything about it, I just don't think there's a lot of value to spending time being informed there. I think there's a lot more value to choosing and carving out your own lane, your own little plot of land, your own little digital garden where you're like, this is my lane, mind hacks, mindful productivity. I'm just going to focus on that, where I can make an impact, where you have a deep intention. And so I'm just very interested in truly building Sublime to help you further that intention. I think it was the founder of Polaroid who once said that his whole life was about teaching people that intense concentration for hours and hours can bring out in people resources that they didn't know they had. And I just think that's increasingly a luxury that we don't have. And it's just so ironic that we spent $1,000 buying these devices, and now we're spending like hundreds of dollars buying these like tech blocking devices that help us curb addiction or block apps at certain times. In some ways, it's the equivalent of what happened with food, right? With the industrialization of food, we had, fast food and, mass market stuff. And that was all great. It got more people fed. Food became cheaper, but it also made more people unhealthy, more people obese. And so in response, we have organic food. And I just think we're starting to enter that phase of, damn, we industrialized the internet, and we all became addicted, and we kind of, all of these, there was misinformation everywhere. And now it's all right, let's kind of rebuild the organic web to some extent. And we're kind of beginning to see that. And I think that's kind of where Sublime is playing, that more kind of human artisanal web, if that makes sense.
That's brilliant. I love that explanation. And the way that you describe it, it seems like Sublime is doing the world a service and it's out here trying to have a positive impact no matter how big or small it is. You're doing what you can. Because, yeah, as you're right, where in a world where we are so filled with distraction, nothing is more luxurious than an ability to pay attention. We're having ADHD meds being prescribed way more than they've ever been. And we don't realize that when we go to the toilet and we take out our phone, or we're in the checkout line and we look at our phone, we're self-soothing ourselves from the anxiety and the boredom that we would otherwise experience having to sit there. And that's where ideas come from. That's how our subconscious kind of communicates to our conscious. We're able to let the feelings and the thoughts kind of come up to the surface. And if we're constantly distracting ourselves, then we don't get to have that level of communication. And then we end up like living a life that's kind of stale, where we're not thinking about how to improve our life or what's wrong, or really able to contribute in a meaningful way to the people in the world around us. So yeah, I think that's very accurate. And I would add on about recently, I found it quite fascinating, not in a good way, how when TikTok, they turned their app a few hours before that they were supposed to be banned. And you could just see how everybody was panicking. And you could see all these people just trying to figure out what to do next. And then all of a sudden, this, I think, Redbook, this other Chinese app, started to gain popularity. And so the government tried to ban this one app, and then everybody just went to another app, also from China. And it seemed like, you can't stop this thing of this population because everybody's addicted to this now. And I really hope that it's not going to lead to our own self-destruction. But I think the audience of people who are even interested in learning about smaller attention is a limited subset of people, because a much larger group of people would just rather take Adderall and assume that's going to solve the problem, instead of looking inward. And it kind of makes me sad to think about. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts?
It's interesting what you described as people instantly migrating from TikTok to Little Red Book, because I do think that we've talked about a lot about the harms of being perpetually distracted and how just that's a very bad thing for us. I think oftentimes it's very easy to point fingers and say Facebook or Meta destroyed this generation or whatever. But the reality is that I think most problems are cultural and not technological. And in some ways, what we've seen is that there's such a dramatic difference between stated preferences and revealed preferences. So people will say, I hate Instagram. I don't want to go on Instagram. I feel bad about myself. But their revealed preference is they continue to go there, right? And if you give them an experience, the most concrete example of this is the For You feed. People will say, I hate the For You feed on, Instagram or Twitter or whatever. Let me control my feed. But then the revealed preference is that actually the For You feed is a lot more addictive and people stick with it much longer and scroll far longer. So there is this disconnect between people wanting to control their online kind of experience and have more friction, and the actual reality, which is the more passive, the less you do, the more other people kind of do on your behalf, the more people gravitate towards those experiences. And frankly, as somebody building software, we see it, the realities that are we've been kind of spoiled and conditioned by these tools that are so seamless and have zero friction that the moment you put something that has a little bit more friction, it just doesn't work. I find it interesting that a lot of technologists are trying to solve some of these problems with technology, right? It's build an Instagram alternative, but, where you control the feed, or build a Twitter alternative, like Blue Sky, but on the blockchain, or let's solve, for kind of, I don't know, the classical Uber for babysitting, when the solution is befriend your neighbors, So I think that in some ways, there's just something about how we try to kind of blame technology and solve with technology things that are truly human problems. And so even when it comes to intention over attention, we are building Sublime to help you deepen that intention, to help you sustain your concentration. And there's a lot of very kind of specific choices that we've made that are conducive to that. But the reality is that no technology is a good substitute for like your own personal will and motivation to do a thing. Even though I've invested the last years of my life building knowledge management software, and I truly think that Sublime is the best tool for people that want a simple experience, the constraint is less the tool and more, the person's like willingness to kind of act. It doesn't matter. Like having a second brain is like a great idea, whether you do it on Sublime or something else. So I don't know. I just find it very interesting that we live in a world where most of the problems are human problems, not technology problems. And yet, all of our effort goes into solving things through technology.
Yeah, I think that speaks to our nature. There was a great book I remember reading about that argued that we are by default lazy. So you're not being a lazy person because you don't want to get up off the couch and go exercise. Your body is designed to minimize the amount of energy expenditure you have to utilize in order to live your life, and that's a self-preservation type of measure. But now we're in this era where technology is both the problem and the solution to everything that is happening to us, especially our restrictive attention spans. And we tend to default to like, I've had people who like will take out their dumb phone at parties, and show everybody that, hey, look, I don't have my phone with me, as like a source of pride. And then there's apps now. I think one's called ClearSpace, that you can restrict how often you open up Instagram or these other restricting apps. In this particular app, it's a pretty novel idea where you have to do like 10 push-ups, or you have to walk for a certain number of minutes before it unlocks the app. But I guarantee that eventually you would just become so frustrated at this paywall of sorts that you uninstall the app. And I haven't really met anybody who hasn't become frustrated with one of these tools. That's that kind of ties you to the mast, per se, so that you can have your cake and eat it too. And it just doesn't work. And really, it's all comes back to that idea of self-regulation. I've been able to find that for me, meditation has been one way of doing that. It teaches you that meta awareness, and that's something that we're increasingly like lacking as a society now. We're trying to outsource our awareness to other tools to tell us, hey, you're not being productive. Hey, you're being distracted right now. But in some ways, it's like, it reminds me of that popular device that became popular that you put on your head that's like an EEG monitor for meditation. And it will, I'm forgetting the name, but it will have like birds will start chirping. And it's like an indicator to you that you're not being focused. But it's the same thing in some ways. You're trying to outsource the awareness to a technology device when it defeats the whole purpose of meditating itself, since that awareness is supposed to come from within. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where all of this takes us, 10, 20 years from now.
The irony of building these like massive consumer software business is also like meditating using your phone. But yeah, I think like you're absolutely right. I think that we are definitely seeing early signs of status signaling, like being offline as a status signal. And the reality is that I wish I didn't have to be super present on social media, but it's just a luxury I can't afford. It's a part of my business. And I wouldn't be able to build Sublime if we didn't have a presence on social media. But it is an interesting world, because in some ways it's like we are, I think if you were to ask most people if they could nobody would want to just leave social media alone. But if all of us kind of, collectively decided to abandon these platforms, and, we would do it. So it's just, there's definitely a collective action question here.
I love this. On your Sublime account, you retweeted, I don't know if you call it, or you reposted this image of like trying to find the flow state. And to achieve the flow state, you have to increase the boredom and increase the anxiety, but you have to do it in just the right way. You posted something like, honey, I'm trying to be bored so I can achieve the flow state. And I love that. I was like so reminiscent of, the new luxury, that the new thing to tout is a willingness. I think that's going to be the next thing, really, is a willingness to be bored, a willingness to demonstrate to others that you're okay with being bored. Because so much of that deep inner fulfillment comes from a place of being bored. It's that boredom that sparks creativity. There's Linus, the creator of Linux. After he created Linux, the operating system, he went on to like start this marketing company and he sold it. But then he dealt with this lack of meaning, this inability to work. And so he decided to step back and just let the creativity come to him. That was on the most recent Every Tattoo. That's where I'm getting that from, the most recent blog post on that. And how it was called Selfish Software. I don't know if you read that article. Instead, he was allowing the ideas to come from within and then to develop software for himself. And, to pursue the intrinsic motivation that can come from a place of boredom, rather than pursuing extrinsic motivation and I need to make more money.
I love that. I didn't read that piece, but I read the headline and I found the idea of selfish self, like very, very kind of on point. What you said reminds me the quote from Blaise Pascal, who said, all of man's problems stem from his inability to sit quietly in a room alone. And I just, I have little kids and I just feel like that is just becoming, they're completely unable to be bored. And so in some ways, I think we're the last generation that like grew up without devices, but it'll be interesting. I think the other part of the selfish software comment is, I think that because we are so exposed to other people's beliefs, we don't trust our own instincts until we've found them reflected in other minds, right? And so selfish software is really about, dialing up the value of your own intuition, the volume of your own intuition, and really kind of cultivating that relationship with your gut. One of my New Year's resolutions for this year, I spent so much time last year doing one-on-one calls with users of Sublime and getting feedback, and it was great. It was necessary. But this year I came in and I said, my goal is actually to take less feedback. In my subconscious, have all of these opinions from people. And it's great to carry them. But now I needed to take all of this and not just treat it as a checklist, but rather like really, again, spend time alone, self-reflecting and figure out how should all of this manifest in a way that makes sense for my product? And that's where I think the selfish lens is a really interesting one.
When it comes to building software, I wholly agree. If you cater to the whims and the feedback of all of your users, you're catering to everyone. And then in essence, you're catering to no one. You can't build everything and anything. You have to build the thing that you think is going to help the target audience and the subset of people that you're trying to help for the objective that you're trying to achieve. So I think that's an important point, is that sometimes there's a time and place for other people's opinions and other people's feedback. But ultimately, that's a tool, just like Google, just like ChatGPT. You have to take that information and then make up your own interpretation of that, not just take it verbatim.
Getting too much feedback sort of like distances you from often your motivation to begin with. And there's just this reversion to the mean. I don't know if you ever saw that photograph of, it was a drawing of if Apple was a democracy. And they had a drawing of the iPhone if it implemented all of its feedback. And it was just this like gigantic phone with like a million buttons and obviously very, very far from what it is today. And so I think so much of the job of a product builder is to figure out what to say no to and maintain the integrity of the product. I think that kind of level of decision-making and craft and judgment, there's so many ways to, like, you can tell 10 different people to build a product to solve the problem that Sublime is solving. And they're going to come up with completely different products. They can be using AI, prompting AI differently, but that's the magic of it, is that there's no one right thing. It's really a manifestation of different points of views and sets of values and things like that.
I want to jump back to something you mentioned earlier I know that you're a mom with 2 kids and you're raising them in this technological revolution, especially with AI changing the game. I remember for Christmas, I'm a nephew and I pulled out ChatGPT and had the Santa voice because it had like the voice of Santa. And he asked him, like, what do you want for Christmas? And then, that was like his first interaction with Santa. And you could see his face light up when he heard Santa's voice and speaking to him in his name. So it's incredible what like AI and technology can do. But simultaneously, we've all been to a restaurant where you see a family and you see two kids just glued to their screens. And I see what happens if there's a TV in the room with my 2-year-old nephew. He just instantly looks at that TV. He is glued. I'm sure you have this experience, like your kids are just glued to this device, and you have to question what's going on here. And there was this controversy around this YouTube channel. I think it's Coco Melon. There was like this hit piece on how Coco Melon is just destroying our kids' brains and destroying their attention because they're literally optimizing this content for maximum addiction with kids, and it seems morally wrong. But of course, if we have the data and the metrics, somebody's going to do it. And now with AI, there's this rise of faceless YouTube channels. And I guarantee there's going to be way more of that, of trying to hijack our kids' attention. And it's going to be on a part of the parents to restrict that. And on the other hand, I've talked to a parent who said, if you're a parent and you don't judge the other parents who have their kids on their iPads because you know what that's like. And I guess, but my sister's family, they're very good with screen time. So I don't know, but maybe can you balance that? I don't know. What are your thoughts on all this?
You said earlier in the conversation that Steve Jobs didn't let his own children use the phone. And so I think, yeah, there's definitely a degree of once you see how the sausage gets made, you don't want to eat the sausage. And I think because I've been close to the tech industry and for years have just been very interested in understanding incentives and dynamics and the consumer web, I don't want my children to be glued to their devices. I think what's the nuance there is that I don't think devices are bad. Like if you think of YouTube, there's so much slop on YouTube. There's so much goodness on YouTube. And so how do you kind of steer and discriminate the good versus the bad? Because that's the kind of middle ground that I'm trying to strike with my own children is I don't want to restrict technology altogether because at the end of the day, there's just so much value. Like my son taught himself how to fish on YouTube and he's learning the piano on YouTube, and those things are incredible. But then, they could just fall down a rabbit hole watching YouTube shorts, and there's just so much slop there. So I don't have an answer to that. I empathize with every parent. I think raising a child in this day and age, the amount of like distraction and dopamine and the inability to be bored is really hard. I just try to maximize the amount of time they spend outside and doing sports. So that's kind of what we try to optimize for.
Yeah, and if you're a parent and you force your kids to not play, you can't play video games, you can't have a phone, you can't do all these things, then it tends to have this very well known rebound effect, right? Where when they leave the college, all of a sudden they're addicted to video games, and then they can't do their schoolwork because you're not there to tell them no. And it's partially like this whole debate about how, you can be a soldier here in the US, but you can't drink. And I know in Europe, it's generally speaking, it's okay to have your child drink as long as a parent is present. And, they have different rates of alcohol abuse, obviously in Europe versus here in the US. And it's attributed to this effect. And so whenever it's parenting, I think you have to have this gentle balance, right? You can't be a helicopter parent, but you can't be completely loose and just letting your kids do whatever they want. If I were to have a guess, I would say that one thing I think we should do, which I don't think obviously not going to happen, but we should teach self-discipline and awareness, because ultimately it's going to be up to the kids at some point to determine what they want to do. And if they can have the awareness to recognize, hey, I'm being addicted to this thing, and maybe I should step back from that, then we're teaching them this inner knowledge and confidence and belief, rather than just either telling them what they can and cannot do because it's going to make them want to do the bad thing.
That's exactly right. I think that prohibiting a child from doing something and then, at age whatever, 15, 18, giving that to them. Like we've seen how that's played out with alcohol and, other things. So it's very tricky. I also think that we spend a lot of time thinking about how to control children's screen time and screen addiction, and not enough time. How are we going to control our kids' screen addiction if adults are addicted as well? So, children learn about the world through modeling. And so the best way to teach them self-discipline, self-regulation, and healthy boundaries is for us as adults to have those healthy boundaries ourselves. So it just feels very hypocritical to be the kind of parent that's, obsessed with not giving your children screen time or cocoa melon when you're just scrolling TikTok, for hours on end. So, I just think that the problem begins with us.
And on that, I think that that's it for the episode. Do you have any other comments or things that you might want to add?
No, thank you. I mean, you just had a lot of very on point comments, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, I appreciate you. So if you're listening and you found this as interesting as I did, we're gonna link to her Substack newsletter in the show notes. And if you're intrigued by the idea of this more thoughtful, creative approach to knowledge work and having a personal knowledge management tool, I'd suggest going to sublime.app as the website. And until next time, remember slowing down is probably the best way to move forward.